There's a room in ancient Rome. Inside it, a young general keeps a poster on his wall. Not of a Roman hero, not of a god, but of his enemy, Hannibal Barca, the man who slaughtered 70,000 Romans in a single afternoon, the one-eyed monster who nearly destroyed Rome itself. And this young Roman, Scipio, studied him obsessively, not to hate him, but to become him. Because here's what history doesn't tell you. The greatest military victory in Roman history wasn't won by being Roman. It was won by a man who abandoned everything Rome believed in and became the very thing they feared most. This is the story of how a student destroyed his teacher, but it's also a warning about what happens when you build your identity on defeating someone else. Because when the enemy is gone, who are you? Let's go back to 216 BC, the Battle of Cannae. Rome sent 80,000 men, the largest army they'd ever fielded, to crush Hannibal once and for all. By sunset, 70,000 of them were dead. Hannibal had used a double envelopment, a tactical masterpiece so perfect that military academies still study it 2,000 years later. And Rome was finished. Or so everyone thought. Because here's the thing about Hannibal, for 15 years he was unbeatable. Every time Rome sent an army, he destroyed it. Every strategy they tried, he countered. Every trap they set, he saw through. He wasn't just a general, he was a psychological weapon. The Romans developed what we'd now call collective trauma, an entire civilization convinced it was fated to lose. They even buried people alive to appease the gods. That's how desperate they were. But then something changed. A young Roman named Scipio, just 18 years old, a survivor of Cannae, looked at Hannibal differently, not as an unstoppable force, but as a teacher. The philosopher Miyamoto Musashi wrote, "There is nothing outside of yourself that can ever enable you to get better, stronger, richer, quicker, or smarter. Everything is within." But what happens when you find something outside yourself, an enemy, and make defeating them your entire identity? What happens when you become so obsessed with your enemy that you become them? That's the story of Scipio. And it's the story of how victory can become the most dangerous prison of all. After Cannae, Rome was in chaos. They were conscripting teenagers, slaves, criminals, anyone who could hold a weapon. And they adopted a new strategy: never fight Hannibal directly. They called it the Fabian strategy, named after Fabius Maximus, who said, "We can't beat him, so we'll just avoid him." It worked, sort of. They contained Hannibal in southern Italy, picking off his allies, starving him of support. But avoiding your enemy doesn't win wars, it just delays defeat. And young Scipio knew it. While everyone else was running from Hannibal, Scipio was studying him. He analyzed Cannae. He studied Hannibal's tactics, the ambushes, the psychological warfare, the way he used terrain, the way he treated local tribes to win their loyalty. And he realized something radical. The Romans weren't losing because Hannibal was better. They were losing because they were fighting like Romans. The Roman way was simple: march straight at the enemy and kick their ass. But Hannibal, he was deceptive, adaptive, strategic. He understood that war wasn't just about strength, it was about psychology. And so Scipio made a choice that would have been considered heresy by any other Roman. He decided to stop being Roman. When his father and uncle were killed in Spain fighting Hannibal's brothers, Rome needed someone to take command. No one volunteered. Spain seemed unwinnable. But Scipio stepped forward. He was only 26 years old, far too young for command. The Senate objected, "You don't have the experience." And Scipio replied, "Yeah, you're 71, you can't stand without pissing yourself." He got the job. But here's where things get disturbing. Scipio didn't go to Spain to fight for Rome. He went to Spain to prove he could be better than Hannibal. His identity was no longer Roman general, it was Hannibal's superior. And that distinction? That's where the psychological trap was set. When Scipio arrived in Spain, he did something no Roman general had ever done. He kept his plan a secret, even from his own men. The Romans didn't do secrets. They did honor, transparency, straightforward combat. But Hannibal? Hannibal did deception. Scipio led his army on a forced march, 7 days straight, past 3 Carthaginian armies to reach New Carthage, Carthage's capital city, in Spain. His men thought they were going to Disneyland. When they arrived, the city seemed impregnable, surrounded on 3 sides by water, accessible only through a narrow passage. Sieges like this took months, sometimes years. Scipio took it in a single day. How? He learned from local fishermen that the lagoon around the city became shallow every afternoon at low tide, so he staged a massive frontal assault as a distraction, then sent a small force through the shallow water to climb the unguarded northern walls. They opened the gates from inside. The city fell before the Carthaginians even knew what happened. Pure Hannibal. But here's the twist. After the battle, Scipio told his men he'd received divine guidance, that the gods spoke to him. It was a lie. A farmer told him about the tides, but Scipio understood something Hannibal knew. Belief is more powerful than truth. The Stoic Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But Scipio had reversed this wisdom. He had given his mind entirely to one outside event, defeating Hannibal. And in doing so, he was transforming. Every battle he fought, he used Hannibal's tactics. Ambushes from concealed positions, using terrain to his advantage, treating conquered people with mercy to win their loyalty. Psychological warfare, even forcing his enemy to fight without breakfast. Exactly what Hannibal had done at Cannae. Scipio wasn't just defeating Carthaginians, he was becoming Hannibal. He defeated Hasdrubal, Hannibal's brother, at the Battle of Bacula using an uphill envelopment. Then, at the Battle of Ilipa, he pulled off Hannibal's signature move. He deceived the enemy for days about his troop formations, then completely reversed them on the day of battle, causing chaos. He won battles while outnumbered using pure cunning. In just 4 years, Scipio had taken all of Spain, a feat as impressive as Hannibal's conquest of Italy. Rome celebrated. But something darker was happening inside Scipio's mind. His entire identity was now built on being the man who defeats Hannibal. Not a Roman, not a leader, not even a person, a weapon, forged specifically to destroy one man. And that's the most dangerous kind of identity you can build. Because what happens when that one man is gone? After Spain, Scipio did something unprecedented. He invaded Africa. Not Italy, where Hannibal was. Not to defend Rome's borders, but straight to Carthage, Hannibal's homeland. The old Roman senators were furious. "You're supposed to fight Hannibal in Italy, that's where the threat is." But Scipio understood strategy better than they did. "I don't need to fight Hannibal. I need to make him come to me." He was hunting his teacher. And it worked. When Scipio landed in Africa and began burning Carthaginian cities, Carthage panicked and recalled Hannibal from Italy. Imagine being Hannibal in that moment. You left Carthage when you were 9 years old. You've spent 16 years in Italy, nearly your entire adult life, fighting this war. You've dedicated everything to destroying Rome. And now you're being told, come home, your life's work was for nothing. That's identity death. When Hannibal sailed back to Africa, he wasn't just returning to defend his city, he was returning to defend the myth of himself. Because if he lost to Scipio, it would prove something unbearable, that he wasn't the greatest general of all time. He was just the teacher who created someone better. The night before the Battle of Zama, the final confrontation, the two men met in person for the first time. Scipio. Hannibal, I'm a huge fan. Hannibal. I thought you'd have more hair. Scipio. And I thought you'd have more eyes. Then Hannibal said something profound. Scipio, you're young. Fortune has favored you so far, but fortune changes. You should negotiate peace rather than risk it all against me. Translation. You've built your identity on being unbeatable. Don't risk discovering you're not. But Scipio's response revealed everything. Negotiate? I took Spain. I'm about to burn your city. What could you possibly offer me? I already have it all. He couldn't negotiate, because his identity required total victory. Machiavelli observed, men rise from one ambition to another. First, they seek to secure themselves against attack, and then they attack others. But he never mentioned what happens when ambition becomes identity itself, when you can't stop attacking because you don't know who you'd be without the fight. The Battle of Zama was a mirror of Cannae, but reversed. At Cannae, Hannibal had superior cavalry and pulled off an envelopment. At Zama, Scipio had superior cavalry, Numidian allies he'd cleverly recruited, and pulled off an envelopment. The student had perfectly copied the teacher's masterpiece. Hannibal's 80 war elephants charged. Scipio had trained his men to create gaps in their formation, letting the elephants run through harmlessly. Hannibal's cavalry was routed. Scipio's cavalry pursued them far from the battlefield, just as Hannibal's had done at Cannae. Hannibal's infantry was strong, but Scipio's cavalry returned just in time to sandwich them from behind. The exact tactic Hannibal had used to destroy Rome. 40,000 Carthaginians died. Rome lost only a few thousand. Hannibal escaped the battlefield and told the Carthaginian Senate, "It's over. Surrender." 17 years of war. Finished. Carthage became a weak Roman client state. Hannibal went into exile. And Scipio? Scipio returned to Rome as Scipio Africanus, the man who saved Rome from annihilation. He was offered consul for life. He refused. Because here's the thing no one talks about. Scipio didn't know who he was anymore. His entire adult life had been built on one purpose: be better than Hannibal, defeat Hannibal. And now, Hannibal was gone. The enemy that had defined him, that had shaped every decision, every tactic, every thought, no longer existed. What's left when your identity is just a weapon with no target? Jealousy grew in Rome, accusations of corruption, political enemies. Scipio, the hero who saved Rome, retired to a country house by the coast. He disappeared from history. And here's the most haunting part. Years later, Scipio and Hannibal met one final time in the city of Ephesus. Two old men, the war long over. Scipio asked, "Who do you think were the three greatest generals of all time?" Hannibal said, "Alexander the Great, Pyrrhus of Epirus, and myself." Scipio smiled. "And if you had beaten me at Zama?" Hannibal replied, "Then I would have been the greatest of all time." They laughed together, because in that moment they both understood the truth. They had both been prisoners of the same identity trap. Hannibal's identity was the man who destroys Rome. Scipio's identity was the man who destroys Hannibal. And when those purposes ended, so did they. Hannibal died in exile, taking poison rather than being captured by Rome. His last words: "Let us relieve the Romans of their anxiety. They think it tries their patience too much to wait for an old man's death." Scipio died quietly, far from Rome, in his country house. No grand funeral, no monuments. Just a man who no longer knew who he was without an enemy to fight. So why does this story matter? Because it's not about Rome. It's not about Carthage. It's about what happens when you build your identity on defeating someone else. Think about it. The rival you need to outperform at work. The ex you need to prove you're better than the parent whose approval you're still chasing, the version of yourself you're trying to destroy. We all have our Hannibal, the enemy that defines us, the person we measure ourselves against, the obstacle that gives our life meaning. And we convince ourselves, once I beat them, I'll be free. Once I prove I'm better, I'll finally be myself. But Scipio discovered the terrifying truth. Victory doesn't free you, it traps you. Because when you finally win, when you finally defeat your enemy, you're left with a question you never prepared for. Who am I when there's nothing left to fight? Nietzsche warned us. Beware that when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster, for when you gaze long into the abyss gazes also into you. Scipio gazed into Hannibal, and Hannibal gazed back, until they became mirrors of each other, both trapped in the same prison. Here's the question that should disturb you. What enemy are you defining yourself against right now? What person are you trying to beat? What version of yourself are you trying to destroy? What victory are you chasing that you think will finally make you whole? Because the Romans celebrated Scipio as the greatest general who ever lived, but Scipio spent the rest of his life in quiet isolation because he won the war, but he lost himself. The greatest battles aren't fought on battlefields, they're fought inside your mind, between the person you are and the person you think you need to become. And the most dangerous enemy isn't someone you can defeat, it's the identity you build around defeating them. Scipio didn't destroy Hannibal. At Zama, he became him. And when the war ended, both men discovered the same truth. That they were never fighting each other, they were fighting the prisons they'd built inside themselves. The teacher and the student, the hunter and the hunted, both trapped in the same cage. And that cage, it's the one we all build when we let an enemy define who we are. Scipio saved Rome, but he couldn't save himself, because some victories don't set you free, they just reveal the bars were there all along.